Our Kelsey Anderson is just outside the doors here at the Cavanoki Theater with a debrief of both tonight's debate and town hall. Good evening, Kels.
Marley and Dave, thank you. And I want to say a nice job to Marley and Dave. I really felt like they kept things on track throughout the night. I'm now joined by Jess Schuster. We're going to kind of go over the high points, some of the low points of the debate, and then the town hall Q&A afterward as well. I do want to warn folks that there are people streaming out of the Cavanoki Theater behind us, so hopefully you can hear us okay. All right, let's talk about who do we think the winner of tonight's debate was?
You know, in a debate with 5 people, I think it's almost impossible to pick a winner. I think that it was clear in this debate that you had 2 frontrunners who, by all accounts, seemed pretty evenly matched. And obviously those were the acting mayor, Chris Scanlon, and State Senator Sean Ryan. But when you have 5 people on the stage, I think there are certain topics that get over-discussed. There are things that get forgotten. We had candidates return to previous questions, and their answer. They weren't given rebuttal time. We saw other candidates eat up entirety of the rebuttal time. So, you know, I would say this was basically exactly what most voters expected it to be, a debate between Sean Ryan and Chris Scanlon with, 3 sort of good but probably minor league players on the stage with them.
Let's talk about those minor league players. Do you feel like they got enough time? I spoke to a Buffalo voter who was sitting next to me. She said she was actually surprised, delightfully surprised by some of their answers, but she said, I haven't really heard from them that much. She didn't even know who maybe some of them were and what their platforms really were. Do you think any of them made big movements tonight?
Do I think they made big movements this year? Probably not. Do I think that some of them have plans? I think they were pretty open about the fact that they may all want continuing futures in government. And look, I think they all did fairly well. I think when you have candidates, a diversity of candidates, sometimes there are people who sort of shine in situations that you might not expect. Right now, I think the real question becomes, do those 3 candidates on the ballot become spoilers for the 2 main candidates? And how are those campaigns going to respond to these 3? So I think the bigger question coming out of tonight is, are these candidates being taken more seriously, and will we see some of these major campaigns, the campaigns that we know are fundraising well, are well executing on their plans, will we see them start to pick off some of these lesser known names, or will we see them start to bolster these lesser known candidates to affect their main opponent? I mean, those are the real questions that campaigns have to work out. I don't know the answer to it. I think all 5 individuals on the stage did a fairly decent job tonight.
Let's talk about the senator, Sean Ryan. He came out, I thought, pretty hot.
Yeah.
Then he didn't even answer a full question. He wanted to rebuttal something from, about 5 minutes ago. He didn't answer the question about the 33 and the money and the funding that was set aside and is being taken away for that project, that billion-dollar project. Do you think him coming out so hot made him look a little bit like a jerk, or do you think it helped his campaign?
Look, that is a campaign decision that I am sure the consultants and the advisors on the Ryan campaign thought very deeply about. I will say it did appear that Sean hit the marks he meant to hit. When he came out with the Palladino pledge early, he talked about Carl Palladino multiple times. I'm sure at this point we have all seen the negative ad. That is a topic that it's clear his campaign wants to focus on, and if that was his goal, I think Sean executed very well on that plan. Will that resonate with voters? The only perfect poll is an election, so I guess we'll find out, if not in 2 weeks, maybe sooner if we start to hear from folks. But the reality is that negative campaigning can be very effective. And so if he has the data to back that up, I think he did very, very well in his goal tonight.
All right, let's talk about Palladino here. He brought that up immediately.
He did.
And that has been in that attack campaign of his. Scanlon said, I have not received $1 from Palladino, but then mentioned William Palladino. I guess talk about, do you feel like Scanlon rebutted that enough, and do you believe him?
I'll be completely honest. In order to sort of stay neutral for tonight, I didn't look at any campaign finance filings beforehand. I do know that according to campaign finance law, LLCs are able to give money, spouses are able to give money. So there's a lot of ways for any candidate who wanted to take money from someone who may not be the most popular to sort of obfuscate that. it all comes out in the wash. You're going to see it eventually. You're going to see Ellicott Development. You're going to see names that you might recognize as related. When the mayor says he hasn't taken a dollar from Carl, that may be true. Now, the Ryan campaign, and I have seen in ads, has pointed to donations from LLCs, from different organizations that appear to be tied to Carl Palladino. I don't know the veracity of whether or not Carl is still a partner in those, but I would assume that some of their fact checkers certainly could provide that backup. In terms of whether or not I think William Palladino, who the mayor acknowledged and said was my friend, is he Carl? Carl had a long history in this community, and he was very well known. I'm not sure it translates to his son, but like I said, the Ryan campaign, if they have the data to back that up, Sean Ryan did a very good job of driving that message home tonight to the viewers who are watching this debate.
Let's talk about some of their movements on stage. We know that those two particularly were standing next to one another. What was their body language like, do you think? And then I noticed something interesting at the end. They all shook hands at the end of the debate, except when the senator went up to the acting mayor, Scanlon did not shake his hand.
You know, I think they certainly maintained collegiality, and regardless of the outcome of this primary, they will have to work together. I mean, you are talking about an acting state senator and the mayor of the second largest city in New York. They have to get along, right? And so regardless, and you're only talking about a primary election. So it is realistic to think that these two individuals will be involved in a general election potentially in November. I think that they did an okay job of keeping things cool. They clearly don't want to be friends, and I think their sort of grimaces, their smirks, their the way that they responded to one another and the questioning, it's clear that there is certainly a rivalry there. There is certainly some bad blood. Look, they competed very heartily for an endorsement, and so I would expect that. I don't think by any means they were the worst two I've seen on the stage. It certainly wasn't. The debate was very well moderated. Dave did a great job. Marley did a wonderful job. Really kept them cool. But you could tell there was some tension.
There was some tension. I think we expected that. I think Tyson Thompson was the first to bring up another city here and kind of try to do that compare game. He brought up Toronto. I don't know how good of a comparison that could be, but it has been brought up through this campaign. Rochester, Syracuse, how maybe they don't have as many financial problems as the city of Buffalo. No one answered tonight the question about raising taxes.
Yeah, and
they danced around it.
That was the first question that Dave asked, and I didn't think anybody directly answered whether or not they would raise taxes. I think the reality is probably every candidate on the stage understands that the city of Buffalo probably needs to raise property taxes. I know I said earlier to you, I think it was Mario Cuomo, if I'm misquoting him, please correct me, but they say that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. So I think that there was a lot of creative answering. You heard some accusations of gimmicks. But I think the reality is when you talk about cities like Rochester, like Syracuse, like Toronto even, again, completely different country, but these places have higher property taxes. You see the acting mayor for the first time requesting authorization to levy an occupancy tax. Cities can levy their own sales tax also. I don't think anybody in the city of Buffalo wants to go down that road of levying an additional sales tax. And so the reality is that all of these candidates probably know they need to raise property taxes at some point and by some increment over a period of years. Do I think everyone has a specific plan for that? Probably not. I think certainly at least Mayor Scanlon and State Senator Ryan, given all of their experience, understand that to be the truth.
Yeah. I loved the question about restaurants and businesses in downtown. Someone up there said downtown is a ghost town. I can't remember if it was Whitfield or Tyson Thompson, but you go downtown, and we've reported on all these businesses that are closing, specifically restaurants that are closing downtown. Do you think anyone had a really good answer to that question? How to bring more foot traffic to the city of Buffalo?
I think that the answer, I actually thought the acting mayor talking about a return to work for employees. I think that's important, but I think also you need strong partnerships with the private sector who also need to bring employees back down to work. He talked about the Thursday concert series, and he talked about, and part of it is that, when there's a strong city of Buffalo, the ripples affect the entire county, they affect the entire region. So having those big conventions, those big draws, those big arts and cultural events really do make a difference. I don't know if anyone gave a good answer. I will say I fondly thought about all the Gus Macker tournaments I played in as a high schooler and a middle schooler even. And yeah, I do miss those. I mean, those were fun times. I think that post-COVID, a lot was reorganized in the world, certainly in this country. And so my hope would be this is the sort of start of a new Buffalo renaissance. I'm not sure that either of them, or any of them, I should say, projected a complete plan, but the acknowledgement, I think, is the start.
Yeah. My mom wouldn't let me go to Thursday in the Square. I was too young. Let's talk about those other three. We have about 3 minutes left, so maybe 1 minute on each.
Sure.
Tyson Thompson, what did you learn from him tonight? Did he answer the questions fully, do you believe?
So my impression of Tyson was that he is very much an idealist, and that is such an important thing in government. I think that he was right to say that there are lots of times that we just accept the status quo. That said, you know, and I understand right now there might be a little bit of an anti-government and anti-incumbency bias. Experience does matter. And so I would question, if he were elected, what would an administration look like? Would he be able to start on day one and be effective? Certainly he talked about his time working for Crystal Peoples-Stokes, and all that is important work. But I think with a little bit more refining, he could be a very formidable candidate in the future.
In the future. Wyatt, Councilman Wyatt, what did you hear from him that you really liked tonight?
You know, the university district, I think, has been well served by the council member. He certainly had a lot of ideas. He talked a lot about community engagement, and he does. His University Fest does bring out probably thousands of people.
And that was one thing he did bring up. He said, I have a festival that does bring out 30 plus thousand people.
County legislators. I mean, he really has done, I think he has experience, but it is hard when you're running against a sort of status quo when you've been a part of it for that long. So while, you know, he said, I don't think I'm old, and I would agree with him, he's certainly not old. Sometimes old in political years is not the same as being old in age. So, you know, I think he's always going to wear a little bit of that baggage. And I think that while he does have a lot of information and he certainly speaks and presents himself well, he's probably going to pick up votes in this race that he would pick up in his normal council race. And that might be the extent of his appeal.
And Garnell Whitfield, he kept bringing up, I have done these things in the past. I have been a successful leader. And he said, being the mayor of Buffalo is being a manager. Yeah, and he's done it.
And I agree. And I thought his point about the mayor being an executive was important. You know, he talked about his experience negotiating. I also thought his point about the job of management, of supervision with the unions is to sort of be the heavy. And that can be very difficult, especially when you're somebody who's come up through the rank and file, like in Buffalo Fire. You know, again, I think he's a very effective public speaker. He had some really good ideas. I just don't see him building enough of a groundswell of support or fundraising enough to compete with the two primary candidates.
All right, political analyst Jess Schuster, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Kelsey Anderson. Thanks for watching.